Okay, now that you have your applicants and you have a lot of applicants, you in some ways have a different type of problem. The problem is who do you spend more time with? Who do you interview? Who do you really consider more deeply? So let's continue this process, but now we're looking at it from the user's perspective. That would typically be your HR group, sometimes your hiring managers, a small business owner, or your in-house recruiters. If you look at this screen, you can see you have a list of candidates. These are applicants who have applied for the role and they've made it through your initial pre-screen, which typically is a very low bar in the sense of they have minimum education, they can work in the US, sometimes minimum number of years experience. But you want to keep that initial bar fairly low to make sure you're looking at the whole pool and you're really looking at the whole person, not just individual qualifications. So, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk through this process and we're going to take a top down, left right approach. So, you can see that your applicants are rank ordered with your best applicant, Michelle, at the top, running right down the list to your worst applicant, James, at the bottom. And it's probably a good time to say that these are not real people, they are based on real test scores, but we're not divulging anybody's personal score. And the customer service role is a role that we picked to be very generic, but you have to imagine this process would be customized to your roles: salespeople, managers, mechanics, literally any role in your organization would have a similar screen, but with different specific assessments. So, a couple of things to note. Top left, you can filter by various things, so you can change from percentile score to raw score. We're going to keep it in percentile score, which are nice because all of these scores are 0 to 100, with 50 being average. It's easier to interpret. But sometimes you also want to look at raw scores. Out of 15 questions, how many questions did an applicant get correct? You can filter by status and only see people who are pending, just to shrink your pool. You can do that by any status you like. Those statuses are all customizable to your needs. And you can look at just highest education or filter by area. Or if you're looking for a specific person and you know something such as their phone number, you can search by that as well. For any of your columns, you can either hide those columns or display those columns. So you see a apply date. I'll often go in and get rid of apply date unless it's something that you're really concerned with at that time, just to give you a little more screen real estate. For all of your applicants, you can choose multiple applicants, and then you can do various actions on that group of applicants. You can change your statuses, make a comment about all of them, download all of their uploaded files, or send candidate reports. Say your boss wanted candidate reports on the top 3 applicants. You could pick the top 3, do a bulk download of candidate reports, and then send them on to your boss, and you're good to go. So this just allows you to quickly do those group actions without having to do them one at a time. For each applicant, if you click on the person's name, you get a resume style view for that applicant. And the nice thing is this view, it looks and feels like a resume, but it's actually built within the system. So everybody's layout is exactly the same. The information that you're presenting on them is exactly the same. And it has some custom information that you typically wouldn't find in resumes, such as how they rated their own level of expertise. Some of the res views also have additional comments specific to the role. One thing I'll note about this applicant is they rated themselves as all 5s. So they're claiming to be an expert in pretty much everything related to this role. But if you go and you look at their background, it's a fairly low level job. You can see why they would rate themselves high. So it's, in this case, it's not a big flag. Speaking of which, I'll jump over here. If you notice, there's a column called tags where people are flagged or tagged with various information. One of the things we flag is if people rate themselves too highly in their level of expertise scores. It doesn't mean that the applicant is a poor applicant. It just means it's something you want to look at. So going across left to right, what you see with each column is a type of assessment. And there's a lot of commonality from job to job, but there's also significant differences from job to job. So most jobs will have some form of an application, which we'll talk about in a second, some form of a personality assessment, which the BVI is our preferred assessment for about 80% of our roles. And then we have an outlook inventory specifically to safety sensitive job. And occasionally another assessment will be used. But this column is typically, does this person's personality or attitude fit the role? Situational judgment is what it sounds like. If you put this person in a situation that's job related, and do they answer correctly? Moving on from the first three assessments, which we call phase one, phase two is where we're doing proctored assessments, typically of problem solving. And this would be things like math ability, logical reasoning, verbal ability. For some jobs, we might also add mechanical aptitude or spatial aptitude. So think of these as core thinking skills that are important for the job. Not all jobs will include a problem solving. Sometimes if it's a highly credentialed role, let's say if you're hiring a surgeon, you typically wouldn't have problem solving because to become a surgeon, you already have to go through a lot of high intensity credentialing steps, and you usually don't need to double check that. But for managerial roles, kind of cognitively intensive roles that don't have high credentialing, problem solving is a great predictor. It's one of your best predictors. For this job, phase three is just an interview. Sometimes with phase three, we'll also include hands-on assessments or other job simulation type assessments or even physical abilities tests. Phase three is anything that's done face-to-face, whether that's a Zoom call or in person. We consider that face-to-face assessment, and we call all of those phase three. The most important score of all of these scores is your baseline score. And it's the most important because it's combining all the information you have on that person up until that point in time. And it's a 0 to 100 score. Usually you're looking for applicants who score 70 or above. So in this case, your top three are looking good. Number 4 and number 5 are looking very weak. The odds of these two moving forward are slim. You would have to be fairly desperate to consider these two candidates, but they technically haven't been knocked out yet, though. Everybody in the gray zone down here, these are people who have been knocked out already based either in test score, or it could be based on your manual review of the candidates. Maybe it was somebody who worked for you as a contractor and you know you're not interested in hiring them. So it's a combination of their actual scores and your judgment on the candidates. Their status can get changed to not recommended or no offer. That puts them in the gray zone down here. And again, if you don't want to see these candidates, you can hide them in the filter. But generally speaking, you're going to be taking a top-down approach. So Michelle is your top candidate. You look at all of her scores are complete. So Michelle is somebody you would strongly want to consider making an offer to. Before you did that, though, you'd want to look at this situational judgment test score, which is pretty low. Everything else about Michelle is strong. This test score is kind of low. And that might make you consider John Brown, although he has a lower BVI score. So I'm going to come back to these scores and go through them one at a time fairly quickly. The online application is actually the assessment that we saw when you were looking at the candidate recruits. So we're going to skip that and go to the BVI scores. So you'll notice for the BVI stands for Big Five inventory. We're measuring the top 5 personality dimensions as they relate to work. And the zoning here is based on the job in question. So this is a customer service rep. You'd like to see the person be somewhat social. You'd like to see him be fairly agreeable, conscientious, stable. And it doesn't really matter if a person in this role is highly innovative. They're not an R&D research person that has to come up with the next great idea to save your company. They're typically going to be more of a friendly person who understands your product or service and can help people who are having difficulty. So you can see this candidate, for the most part, scores in green zones, has one yellow zone for considerate individuals tend to be caring, compassionate, and concerned about others, but based on the exact definition, this person's going to be a little bit low on that for this role. Now, an important thing to note here is that nobody is perfect for the role. Everybody has some issues in the sense of not fitting perfectly. What we're looking for is as many green zones as possible, and in most cases, higher scores beat lower scores with a few exceptions. So next, let's look at situational judgment. For situational judgment, I've mentioned you're basically looking at, does this person respond to situations the way you would hope they would respond? If they do respond correctly before you've even provided them with training, then it's a lot easier for you to assume they're going to do well after you provide them with training. So let's look at a couple of the questions that Michelle got wrong here and see if they're concerned. The first one, your supervisor informs you that you are not pulling your weight at work. How would you react? Michelle said she would listen, remain neutral, and give an explanation. Now, that's not a terrible answer. A slightly better answer would be to say, listen, remain neutral, and agree to make more of an effort. So it's wrong, but it's not seriously wrong. As long as that pattern isn't too strong, we're not going to make too much out of a single question like that. Question number 2, she got correct, so we'll skip that. Question number 3, you overhear one of your coworkers discussing legally privileged information with someone who they should not be sharing it with. How do you handle the situation? Michelle said, inform my boss since it's not my place to intervene. The optimal answer is approach the person and discuss the issue in private. So this question is a good example of where, based on the culture of your organization, Michelle actually might have given the right answer. But for the client who created this situational judgment test, they would prefer that the person try to handle it on their own first before going to their boss. So depending on the hierarchy of your company, you might code the first response correct or the second response. This is useful because it allows you to dial in the situational judgment tests to the culture of your organization. Are you more of a hierarchical military type culture, maybe a nuclear power plant where everything is by the book, super strict? Or are you an 8-person startup where everything's a little more loosey-goosey and you're not worried if somebody doesn't have the employee handbook memorized? The situational judgment test is a great tool for matching candidates to your existing culture. And it's a tool that gets better over time as we track the results and see how they're working. I'm going to come back to that tracking in a second here, but I want to point out a couple of other features. First of all, you can open up any of the applicants and you can see additional notes on that applicant. In the case of Michelle, you can see kind of like a log of activity. She was sent an email, she completed an assessment, she was sent an email, and so forth. A lot of that activity is not going to be all that important, but every once in a while, somebody might put something in, such as this note, check wrong answers on SJT before making an offer. That's a worthwhile note and something to think about. And we talked about flags a bit. Statuses are customizable system settings that tell you where a person is in the process. And importantly, statuses can also trigger events. So if you were to change this status, for example, to offer extended, that could automatically trigger a message to go out to Michelle inviting her to become a part of your organization. And all of those messages and triggers are highly customizable. Your project manager will work with you to make sure the automation doesn't do anything that you don't want it to do, that it's based off of the rules that you set up in advance. For each of the applicants, you can do more detailed candidate reports, which we won't show in this demo. And you can also reach out, contact the applicant. You can do this individually or in bulk. When you contact the applicant, there's a list of preset templates for messages you can send. And a lot of these templates are customizable and they are always customized to your organization and to the jobs in question. So you don't have to go through a list of messages that make no sense for you. They'll all be messages that you would consider using. And as I mentioned earlier, those messages can be triggered automatically. In fact, the entire process is programmable, where if a person passes an assessment, they can be invited to the next step of the process automatically, or they can be sent to review and then manually invited to the next step of the process. So if you have large scale processes with thousands of applicants going through, you can essentially set the whole process up assembly line, and then your team just focuses on the end of the line, those final interviews that really make a big difference. I'll mention a couple of things regarding some big picture features or reports that you can do with the process. You can do all kinds of exports. We can also connect HireScore up to your legacy systems. That could be, say you have a workday system or a payroll system you want to connect to. We can do full integrations with just about any product that allows us to connect. You can also do a boost cycle, which allows you to quickly get more applicants for this process. Say your Indeed ads aren't working, you're just not getting the number of people you want. If you click on boost cycle, answer a few questions, the system will go out and find applicants that meet your needs and allow you to invite those applicants. Some other detailed features we'll skip for now, but this basically covers what we think of as the evaluation stage of HireScore, where you're evaluating candidates using customized assessments and then rank ordering based on a statistically optimal weighting of those assessments. We do lean on AI significantly in our creation of these weights. But one thing to note is that AI, it is not determining the final baseline score, because AI tends to use a non-deterministic evaluation method, which is really difficult to defend if your process is challenged. So what we do is we kind of take the best parts of AI decision making, build them straight into the algorithm. So if Michelle were to apply in 3 months, the same job with the same responses, she's going to get the same scores. Where with an AI only process, if Michelle applied 5 times, she would get 5 different scores, even if she responded exactly the same way every time. So that's what we mean by deterministic versus non-deterministic. So next, we'll talk a little bit about the optimization process for this data and how this process gets better over time. Okay, for the optimization phase, we're going to use the same screen since we just went through it. Imagine that you went ahead and you hired Michelle. She's your highest baseline score, interviewed well, really strong problem solving score, and had one flag here with a situational judgment test. And I'm going to change this filter now to focus on a raw score. So Michelle got 8 out of 15 on the situational judgment test. We didn't see, at least in our quick review, any questions that were really dramatic in terms of her getting it wrong. But now let's fast forward. Let's say you hire Michelle, and 1 year later, it turns out she didn't work out. What the process will do, what HireScore has built into it, is what we call the continuous improvement feedback loop, where anytime a mistake is made, we go back both in an automated fashion using AI and also using human expertise. We look for what went wrong with that cycle. And in this case, let's imagine that Michelle's situational judgment score was actually predictive. What we could do is we could say, anytime in the future for this customer service role, you need to get at least a 9 or higher, or you will not be considered for this role regardless of your other score. So basically, you're going to tweak the cut scores slightly. I'm using a single example here. This works much better when you're talking about hiring 50 or 100 people. There's a pattern where ignoring situational judgment tests scores is causing you to hire at a lower success rate. But the point is with that feedback loop, your process gets better over time. You don't simply make the same mistakes over and over. If you think about screening resumes, you could screen resumes for 20 years, yes, no, maybe, yes, no, maybe. And if you don't get feedback on your evaluation, there's really no learning. You don't get better over time. You only get better with feedback. And HireScore is built to incorporate that feedback loop automatically, where we're coming to you and we're saying after a year, how did Michelle work out? How did your other employees work out? And very importantly, you're learning from your mistakes, but you're also learning from the collective mistakes of all of our clients. So you might learn that question number 4 on your situational judgment test isn't as predictive as it should be. And we know that across 15 different clients who use the same question. And therefore, we swap out that question to make it a better question. This is happening continuously without you having to do anything. So your process just ratchets up. It starts as a great process and it gets better from there with more and more data. And again, we call that the continuous improvement feedback loop, which is part of the optimized process for HireScore. If you have questions, feel free to reach out anytime. I hope this overview was helpful.